So most of you are probably familiar to some extent or another with the On Track series by Sonic Bond Publishing, where for every installment of it, they cover an artist's full catalog, song by song by song, right? And they just did an installment of that covering the solo work of Peter Hammill, written by Richard Rees Jones. And I just finished reading the Peter Hammill edition of On Track, and so I thought it would be interesting to partly just kind of do a brief review of it as a book, and then also give a couple of reactions to either places where I thought it was interesting, how his opinion either dovetailed with mine or we had some differences of opinion about the quality of different albums. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We're a band that does music which is very influenced by, but not totally limited by, progressive rock. We try to be complex, but emotionally articulate. As you can imagine, Hammill is a really big influence. You can find us on Bandcamp, your favorite streaming service, or there are a couple of album playlists right here on YouTube. So as far as the review part goes, I did find the book very interesting, very educational. It's a very fun read. Rees Jones has been a really committed Hammill fan since about 1991, and he's got a really huge amount of knowledge to draw from. You know, he's citing interviews with Hammill from various periods throughout his history. He cites things Hammill has written on his website, liner notes, some of the books Hammill's published collecting his lyrics and various kinds of commentary, and the annual newsletters that Hammill's been doing for a while. Now, I know Hammill's catalog fairly well, and some of that stuff that I just mentioned I had read, particularly the things on the website and the liner notes for the reissues, of course. But there's a lot of other kinds of accessory content that he draws from here, like, again, a lot of those interviews, the newsletters, that I hadn't really had the opportunity or the time to track down and immerse myself in. So I actually had a fair amount to learn just about references in the lyrics, interpretations of the lyrics, production techniques, right? Circumstances around the album. There's also just, I think, a level of study and attention that you might achieve over 30 years that is probably going to be a bit greater than what you achieve over 7 years, which is how long I've been a dedicated Hammill listener. Just a random example, and maybe this is not the best example for a lot of viewers, maybe not the example Rees Jones would want me to cite, but in the song Birthday Special, there's a line, I had never caught that there's a line that says, "There's floaters in the bathroom." And Rees Jones points out that line is Baudelairized a bit in the official printed lyric in Hammill's book. Now, this has completely not come across on this channel, but I do have kind of a soft spot for toilet humor, and it kind of tickled me to notice that, right? Because I had never picked that lyric out. Another example, the song Pushing 30 from the album The Future Now. The first line in that, first line on the album even, is seems the fashions for one-liners these days, the kind that get up everybody's nose. I had never picked up that that was a cocaine reference, which I feel very naive now to say that, but I thought it was just kind of an awkward metaphor for crass jokes, right? So there are a lot of little things like that that maybe I would have caught in 30 years, but I didn't catch in 7. And I found it an edifying read for that kind of reason. Now, if you're someone who has spent decades being absorbed in the albums and all the kinds of accessory material that I talked about, then, you know, there may be less to discover in the book for you. It might be less of an interesting purchase. But, you know, if you're someone like me who has a pretty good grounding in the work, but maybe not quite as much of a history with some of the surrounding material, then I'd recommend it. You know, I think it's an interesting educational companion to those albums. And, you know, if you're really just kind of diving into the whole Hammill catalog, certainly would be a great companion for that, in combination with my videos, of course. It's also quite well written, I thought. You know, Hammill obviously is someone who, as a writer, as a musician, as an arranger, tries not to repeat himself, but in some sense, still, you know, you have something like 400 song reviews in a row, um, I'd imagine it was very hard as a writer to avoid obvious repeated phrases, descriptions, right? And, I read this in basically 2 long sittings on a flight to and from Seattle to New Mexico. And so, in that context, reading the whole thing in a row like that, he did a pretty good job of avoiding the kind of repetition that I think would be very easy to do for a more careless writer. There's a level of care and attention that really, to my eyes at least, seems to have been put into how this was written. That really comes through. I appreciated it. Now, I've heard the subject of length come up. Sonic Bond is a fairly small press, I believe. I don't know that they would have the resources to publish an enormous book. And I have seen in comments on other Hamill videos, comments on my own Hamill videos, and then some stuff on Facebook, I've seen some disappointment expressed over the length, right? For comparison, I also have the on-track book about Gentle Giant, who have about 11 albums, and 12 if you count Playing the Fool. The Gentle Giant on track is about 120 pages. This is about 170 pages, give or take, right? So even accounting for the fact that the type is smaller in this than in the Gentle Giant on track, obviously the ratio of size there suggests that this isn't 4 times bigger than the Gentle Giant book, right? So I can certainly imagine that if he'd been given space by the publisher, probably Rees Jones could have put more in or, made an even bigger book. But I don't think that takes away at all from the quality of what is there. The other aspect of this, of course, was it was really fun, as somebody who is, who's done a project where I had to really kind of think in depth about my own feelings about the quality of all the different Hammill albums. It was really fun just to go through and see the different ways that he was responding to and appreciating or not appreciating different things. There are a couple albums that he and I both responded to really positively that don't seem as well loved. The album Over, obviously everybody loves everything from the 70s, but I put Over at number 3 when I did my ranking of that decade. And a lot of people put it somewhat lower and weren't as keen on it as some of the more experimental or left field stuff. But Rees Jones actually refers to it as his all-time favorite Hammill album. So, I found it gratifying to see that get some love. Another album that I was pretty kind to was Out of Water, right? I put Out of Water at number 3 when I did the ranking of the 80s. And I talked in that video about how going back through and listening, I'd really forgotten how much I appreciated that album. I forgot how much interesting stuff there was on it. I really enjoyed it and really came away with a very good impression of it. A lot of people in the comments really didn't seem to like that album very much. It is something that's close to, that album is also pretty close to Rees Jones's heart. He's very kind to it there too, so I did appreciate that. In general, he likes Hammill more than I do, right? And I do like Hammill an awful lot, but, he's someone who has had Hammill as his all-time favorite musical artist for his whole adult life, and I'm not quite at that level. So most of the gaps between his opinion and mine actually have more to do with things that he likes actually a bit more than I do. And I don't have any attachment to being a detractor of any particular work of Hammill's, right? I'd much rather find some kind of way to crack it open and appreciate it than I would to defend the opinion that it's not that great, right? So I was very interested in reading his commentary on the stuff that he liked that I'm not as keen on. And close as this, I know that I've always been kind of an outlier as far as not liking that album that much, but his description of the process around recording it did seem pretty interesting. And, I've actually never had a hard copy of that album. That's, I think, maybe the only Hammill album that I don't have a copy of. I did go ahead and order a copy after I finished reading this book. I'm going to give that one some more thought and attention. Although, to pat myself on the back, I think I did a fairly articulate argument against it in my review in the 80s Decade video. He was very complimentary toward What Now, which really surprised me because it struck me in the comments that a lot of people seem to share my feeling that it's a little bit of a misfire. You know, as I said in my 2000s video, that's an album where every song has some kind of interesting idea on it, but every song feels like a promising idea lyrically or arrangement-wise or melodically. Every song feels like a promising idea that wasn't really developed into something that works all the way. And the things that I perceive as flaws just continually take me out of that album when I try to connect with it. And he really, really likes it, probably more so than any commentator that I've ever read on that album. So next time I happen to just kind of be in a good, positive, open-hearted mood, I'm going to go back to What Now, listen to it, read it with his comments, see if that kind of helps me connect with it. There's one album where a factual correction may be due on my part, which is X My Heart. In my video, I referred to that as being the first album where Hammill really works in more of a like a singer-songwriter, solo-oriented kind of format. And as Rees Jones points out in the book, it really is more of the last full band album that he did with the Roaring 40s lineup, right? I think that he called that band The Noise. In my defense, that album has so little interesting work from the band compared to something like Roaring 40s that it feels like a movement away from that full band style, even though ostensibly they're all still hanging out there doing something, right? But I probably did mischaracterize that album a little bit. There's really only one thing that I like significantly more than he seems to, which is the margin. I actually haven't talked about live albums on any of these videos, but man, the margin is one of my 10 or so favorite discs in the whole Hammill catalog, right? I love that album. And Rees Jones is a bit dismissive of disc 1. He calls it formal and airless, which, I don't know how to make the argument that that album is informal or air-filled, but it's goddamn brilliant. Now, he and I are both very keen on disc 2, so, overlap there. He's also not as hot on Consequences and Fire Ships as I was, but, I can just write that off as personal taste, and it probably isn't too much worth delving into that. Anyway, if you watch my videos on Hammill, I do suspect you'll likely really enjoy this book, and he's obviously an incredibly knowledgeable and passionate Peter Hammill fan who has a lot of respect from me as such. So I'd recommend it if you have an interest in Hammill's work and anything below an absolute PhD level knowledge of it. All right, thanks for sticking around through my thoughts. As usual, I will see everybody next week, hopefully. Check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp, your favorite streaming service, or check out one of the album playlists here on YouTube.